The morning bustle at Atlanta International Airport was intensifying. Pilots and flight attendants navigated the terminal with purpose, their sharp uniforms giving off an air of professionalism. In the midst of it all was Captain Marcus Williams, a pilot with more than 10 years under his belt. His navy blue uniform was spotless, and the gold-striped epaulets sparkled beneath the bright lights overhead. He carried himself with a palpable sense of assurance. He had every reason to feel that way. Yet confidence could falter in the face of indifference. As Marcus made his way to the crew lounge, an exclusive area meant for flight crew members, he instinctively reached for his ID badge, fully prepared for the usual verification at the door. But before he could present it, a security officer stepped into his path. "Sorry, sir, this area is for crew only," the officer said, his tone somewhat brusque. Caught off guard for a moment, Marcus looked at the officer's name tag, Ethan Carter. "I understand," Marcus replied calmly. "That's why I'm here." Ethan remained unmoved, crossing his arms and scrutinizing Marcus from head to toe, making him feel a knot of unease in his stomach. "I'll need to see some ID," Ethan insisted. Marcus took a deep breath, maintaining his composure. "Of course." He raised his ID badge, revealing his official Atlantic Airways credential, complete with his name, photo, and pilot certification. Ethan barely acknowledged it, his expression unchanged. "This could be fake," Ethan mumbled. A tightness twisted inside Marcus, and he clenched his grip on his flight bag. Around them, other pilots, clearly Caucasian, strolled by without being questioned. They scarcely noticed the tension, while a few cast discreet looks that revealed a range of emotions: pity, embarrassment, or just plain indifference. Marcus steeled himself, having faced such moments before where he had to justify his presence in ways that others did not, but today, under the scrutiny of the whole lounge, felt notably different. "You just let 3 pilots walk in without checking their IDs, Marcus noted, his voice steady, yet carrying an unmistakable edge. "I know them," Ethan shrugged. "Hey," a bark of laughter escaped Marcus before he could rein it in. "And you assume I don't belong?" "I didn't say that," Ethan replied, his expression neutral but his body language tense. Taking a deep breath, Marcus suppressed the rising anger. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and pressed record without hesitation. "Sir, I'm Captain Marcus Williams. I've been with Atlantic Airways for 12 years. I showed my ID, but you're still not letting me into the crew lounge. What's going on?" Ethan's jaw tightened. There was a brief glimpse of uncertainty in his eyes. He glanced around, as if he just realized how many people were watching. "I'm just doing my job," Ethan muttered. "Really? Because it looks like your job is pretty exclusive," Marcus retorted. The tension hung heavily in the air. Some of the other pilots had stopped pretending not to eavesdrop. No one said anything. Finally, Ethan moved aside, clearly hesitant. "Fine," he mumbled. "Go on in." Marcus held Ethan's gaze for a moment longer before stepping past him, walking tall, each stride filled with humiliation. The damage was already done. Inside the lounge the atmosphere shifted. Conversations had stilled. Everyone had witnessed what transpired. Jack Redding, a fellow pilot Marcus knew, sat near the coffee station. Jack was generally laid back, not one to stir trouble, but he also never voiced his opinions loud enough to be heard. "Rough morning?" Jack ventured, stirring his coffee awkwardly. Marcus tossed his flight bag onto a chair. "Is that really how we're labeling it?" Jack chuckled weakly, unease flickering in his eyes. "Look, I wouldn't take it to heart. You know how some of these security guys are." Marcus turned to him, his tone low but firm. "Did he ask for your ID?" Jack hesitated. That silence was all the confirmation Marcus needed. After a moment, Jack finally exhaled. "No, he didn't." Marcus clenched his jaw, nodding slowly. "Right." Jack shifted uncomfortably, glancing around before lowering his voice. "Listen, Marcus. I understand. But is it really worth making a big deal out of this?" A cold weight settled in Marcus's chest. A big deal. His voice dropped to a whisper, edged with frustration. You think I want this? You think I like constantly having to prove that I belong here? Jack held up his hands. I didn't mean it that way. Then how did you mean it? Jack had no response, opting to sip his coffee instead. Marcus let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. He pulled out his phone, staring at the video he'd just recorded. This wasn't merely about him. It was about every pilot who had faced questioning, doubt, or dismissal solely based on their skin color. And tonight, Marcus had finally decided enough was enough. Sitting in his apartment, he stared intently at his phone, the video open on his screen, Ethan Carter's condescending voice echoing in his mind. Could this be staged? The thought clawed at him. For years he had worked hard to build his reputation. Every hour in the cockpit, every perfect landing, every emergency managed with expertise. Yet in an instant, a security officer who didn't know him and didn't care had stripped him of his integrity. He recognized the potential fallout if he shared the video, the criticisms, the hushed advice from colleagues who urged him to just let it slide. But the alternative was clear. Nothing would change. Taking a deep breath, Marcus opened his social media app, uploaded the video, and began to write. 12 years in the commercial aviation field, countless flights, thousands of lives in his hands. And yet today, I was stopped outside the crew. Lounge at ATL solely because I didn't look like a pilot. Here's what unfolded when I showed my ID. He hesitated for just a heartbeat before hitting post. The reactions came pouring in. Initially, just a few supportive comments from fellow pilots who shared their own stories. And then, like a tidal wave, the retweets and shares rolled in. People were outraged. Not just fellow pilots of color, but passengers, flight attendants, and even other captains who had never considered the challenges faced by pilots from diverse backgrounds. Within hours, the video was trending. Then the first call came in. The number that lit up his screen was from HR at Atlantic Airways. Marcus took a deep breath and answered, Captain Williams. The voice on the other end was sharp and formal. Too formal. Marcus, this is Elaine Foster from HR. We've seen your post and need to discuss it immediately. He leaned back in his chair, bracing himself. Here we go. What would you like to discuss? There was a moment of silence. We're concerned about how this situation is being portrayed. Marcus felt his muscles tighten. Were they worried about the portrayal? Or were they just anxious that the truth had finally been unveiled? Look, Elaine continued after a hesitation. We take these matters seriously, but putting it online like this, do you genuinely believe that's the best course of action? Marcus couldn't help but let out a quiet, bitter laugh. There it was. I brought this to your attention first. You said it was just a miscommunication. But now that it's public, suddenly it's a critical issue. Elaine sighed, feeling the strain of the mounting pressure on the company. We need to sort this out quickly. Would you think about taking down the video? Marcus felt his heart race. Why? So it can just be brushed aside like everything else? That's not what I mean. Then what are you saying, Elaine? There was a pause, and when she finally spoke, her voice dropped. You have a bright future here, Marcus. Don't let this be what defines you. His body tensed at her words. This already defines me. The call wrapped up shortly after, but Marcus understood that this was only the beginning. The following morning, he entered the Atlantic Airways office for a scheduled meeting, uncertain of what awaited him. The tight expressions on the HR staff's faces spoke volumes. Sitting across from Elaine Foster and two other executives, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Marcus, we're all professionals here, one of the executives, David Lowell, began. We see that this incident was troubling, but the attention it's garnering is worrying. Marcus folded his arms. Worrying in what way? Elaine cleared her throat. We've been receiving messages from passengers, employees, even journalists. This is hurting our reputation. I didn't harm your reputation. Your security officer did, Marcus shot back. David sighed, frustration evident in his demeanor. Let's be realistic, Captain Williams. You've made your point, but airlines rely on public trust, and this type of controversy is destabilizing. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. So what? You want me to issue a statement claiming I overreacted? Elaine quickly shook her head. No, not like that. We just want to move on. Perhaps you could clarify that it was a regrettable misunderstanding. Marcus stared back at them, realizing they weren't seeking change. They only wanted to keep this under wraps. He leaned in. No. Elaine's brow furrowed. No. Marcus's tone was unwavering. I won't minimize what occurred, and I won't allow you to conceal it. The room fell silent. David's expression grew stern. You do understand that going against the company like this could lead to repercussions, right? Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken. He was being warned, but he stood his ground. You know what else comes with consequences? Turning a blind eye to discrimination. A muscle twitched in David's jaw. You need to be deliberate with your next move, Captain Williams. Marcus held Marcus's gaze steady. I'm already on it. As he stepped out of the office, adrenaline surged through him. Yet for the first time in ages, he felt empowered. He glanced at his phone as he transitioned into the hallway. A fresh email from a journalist caught his eye. Captain Williams, I'm interested in learning more about your experiences. We're investigating allegations of discrimination at Atlantic Airways. Would you be open to a conversation? Marcus's fingers hovered over the screen. This was no longer solely about him. He pressed reply. He never anticipated he would become a headline, but there he was. His face splashed across news sites, his name buzzing in aviation discussions, and his story sparking debate on morning shows. Some hailed him as courageous. Others branded him an instigator. The messages flooded in, some from fellow black pilots recounting their own hidden struggles, others from strangers expressing gratitude for his courage. But amid the supportive notes came threats, venomous remarks, and emails labeling him a liar, an embarrassment, an affirmative action pilot who had grown too complacent. Marcus tried to shake it off. He kept his eyes on the larger reality unfolding. The FAA had officially commenced an investigation, and Atlantic Airways was reeling. A week later, Marcus found himself in a cafe, gripping a steaming cup of black coffee. Across from him sat Lisa Tran, a senior journalist for a major news outlet. She was the first to reach out to him. How extensive is this issue? Marcus asked. Lisa leaned in, her voice lowering. Deeper than you think. She retrieved her phone and scrolled through her notes. I've connected with several former employees, HR representatives, and management alike. All of them echoed the same message. Atlantic Airways has a history of ignoring discrimination complaints, letting them dissipate during internal reviews. A shiver crept down Marcus's spine. You mean they just disregard them? Lisa met his gaze. Worse, they erase them. She placed a folder on the table and slid it towards him. Marcus hesitated before opening it. Inside were internal emails, complaints from pilots and flight attendants, formal reports that got swept under the rug due to insufficient evidence. Except there was evidence. His stomach knotted as he scanned the documents. Pilots overlooked. For promotions, flight attendants punished for minor slip-ups, while others faced no repercussions. People resigning after years of feeling invisible. And then he found it. His own name. A complaint had been lodged 2 years prior about a hiring decision where Marcus, despite having more experience, lost a promotion to a white pilot with fewer qualifications. Marcus felt a tightening in his chest, the weight of realization crashing down on him. He had never even known there was a complaint filed on his behalf, yet here it was. Somebody had fought for him, and Atlantic Airways had effectively buried it. He glanced at Lisa, his hands, gripping the folder so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. How did you find this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa let out a breath. I used to work in HR. I left the company last year. She couldn't stomach staying silent any longer, watching everything unfold. Marcus rubbed his hand over his face, his thoughts a whirlwind. This wasn't just about Ethan Carter and the airport incident. No. It was much larger than that. It was an issue that ran deep within the system. Lisa tapped the folder gently. The FAA is about to get their hands on these files. Once they do, Atlantic Airways won't be able to deny anything anymore. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. He should have felt a sense of triumph. Instead, it was as if he were standing in the spotlight, feeling utterly exposed. He understood what was looming ahead. They were going to come after him. The next morning, while at home, his phone rang. It was Captain Jeremy Holt, one of the highest-ranking black pilots at Atlantic Airways, a man Marcus held in deep regard. "Marcus," Holt began, his tone serious. "You need to be cautious." Marcus's brow furrowed. "What's happening?" There was a pause before Holt continued. "They're building a case against you." Instantly, Marcus sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Holt hesitated again. "They're combing through your records, searching for anything they can use to undermine you. I got wind of this from someone in management. They want to paint a picture of you having a disciplinary history." Marcus felt his heart race. "That's absurd, and you know it." Holt sighed heavily. "Of course I do. But that doesn't matter to them. They just need a way to fire you or, at the very least, make others question your credibility." Marcus's jaw tightened in anger. He had anticipated some resistance. But this was an outright attempt to ruin him. "Listen, Marcus," Holt cautioned. "The FAA is putting the pressure on them. This is their desperate last move." Marcus exhaled sharply, a spark of concern igniting in him. Desperate people were known to act recklessly. "Thank you for the heads up, Captain." Holt paused, before adding, "For what it's worth, you're doing the right thing." Marcus closed his eyes momentarily, absorbing the weight of that statement. "I hope so." Just 3 days later, the FAA's report was made public. It was more shocking than anyone had anticipated. Complaints about discrimination had been buried, and internal documents were either manipulated or vanished altogether. Those who dared to speak out found themselves quietly shoved aside, while Atlantic Airways engaged in a desperate cover-up. Marcus sat in his car, his eyes glued to the news on his phone. FAA suspends Atlantic Airways license pending review of discrimination practices. His hands trembled. He had taken a stand. But as he scrolled through the avalanche of online comments, he felt the tide of criticism beginning to wash over him. People claimed he was just craving attention. They argued that individuals like him were tarnishing companies with their complaints. If he were a genuine pilot, they said, he wouldn't need to go to the FAA. Marcus took a slow breath. He had won a significant battle, but the war was far from over. The day after the FAA's announcement, Marcus woke to an explosion of notifications. His name was trending everywhere. FAA takes action against discrimination at major airline. Atlantic Airways, facing allegations of systemic racism. Investigation uncovers years of deception. Pilot who revealed the truth, now encountering threats and legal backlash. His heart raced as he skimmed through the articles. This was real. A massive airline had been shaken to its core because of what began as a courageous act of defiance. Suddenly, his phone chimed with a message. "You seeing this?" It was Lisa Tran, the reporter instrumental in exposing the damning evidence. "Yeah," he replied. "They're scrambling for damage control. Just put out a statement claiming they take these allegations seriously and will conduct an internal review." Marcus scoffed at the idea. An internal review? Seriously? Lisa sighed heavily. "They're just trying to shift the blame. They fired Ethan Carter this morning." Marcus felt his muscles tense. He should have anticipated this. The perfect scapegoat. "They're making it seem like it was solely his fault," Marcus said bitterly. "As if he was the only issue at play." Lisa paused briefly. "It gets even worse. They also let go of their VP of HR and some lower-level managers, but the top executives remain untouched." Marcus gritted his teeth. Naturally, the real decision-makers, the ones who erased those complaints and allowed this toxic culture to thrive for years, were still secure in their positions. "They want to create the illusion of cleaning house," Lisa said, but they're really shielding those who allowed this to happen. Marcus breathed out sharply. This wasn't justice, it was sheer survival. So, what's next? He asked. Lisa hesitated. That's up to you. Marcus closed his eyes, fully aware of what she was suggesting. He found himself at the center of a storm, whether he welcomed it or not. Public opinion was deeply divided. Many rallied around him, pilots, flight attendants, a few passengers, all reached out to offer their support. Thank you for voicing what so many of us have felt. I left this industry over the same issue. You're making a real difference. My son dreams of being a pilot. I hope the world changes for him, thanks to people like you. But the opposition was fierce. You've ruined a company over a misunderstanding. You've cost people their jobs just to boost your own profile. Hope you're never allowed back in aviation again, you jerk. The hateful messages poured in quicker than he anticipated. Some were veiled, dismissive remarks online, others were outright death threats. He brushed most of them off. But one night, when he opened his inbox, time seemed to freeze. An email with no subject line contained just a chilling message. You should have stayed quiet. Attached was a photo of his apartment building. Marcus felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. This was escalating beyond mere online harassment. The next morning, he met with his attorney, Daniel Harper, at his downtown office. Daniel slid a folder across the table. We need to discuss your employment status. Marcus frowned. What about it? Daniel sighed deeply. They're building a case against you. Officially, you're still employed, but they're searching for a way to let you go without it looking like retaliation. Marcus wasn't shocked. They couldn't afford to fire him outright, not after everything that had transpired. But they definitely wanted him out. So what's my next move? Daniel hesitated. You have options. Resigning, pursuing legal action, or… I'm not quitting. Marcus interjected firmly. Daniel nodded, a hint of concern in his eyes. Then prepare for them to make your life miserable. Marcus exhaled slowly. He already felt that weight. Later in the week, Atlantic Airways held a press conference. Marcus watched from his laptop as CEO Richard Callaway stood at the podium, his expression one of rehearsed sorrow. We take full responsibility for our internal failures, Callaway stated smoothly. What happened to Captain Williams was unacceptable, and we are dedicated to restoring trust. Marcus scoffed at the hollow words. Unacceptable, Callaway continued. We've rolled out new diversity initiatives, hired an independent consultant, and will ensure every team member undergoes sensitivity training. With a frustrated click, Marcus closed his laptop. Corporate nonsense. They weren't changing. They were just surviving. That night, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, his gaze fixed on his phone. Another unknown number flashed on the screen. He hesitated, breath held before answering. Hello? Silence pierced the air before a low voice broke it. You should be careful who you mess with. Click. Marcus remained frozen, the dial, tone ringing harshly in his ear. This was no longer just about his job. Someone was trying to intimidate him into silence. But Marcus had spent his entire life proving he belonged in spaces where others said he didn't. And he wasn't about to back down now. He had never shied away from taking risks. Yet, as he sat alone in the dark, phone in hand, he felt an unfamiliar weight settle over him. Not fear, not regret. Something much heavier. The unknown caller's words echoed in his mind. A warning. A threat. A stark reminder that some would go to great lengths to keep people like him in their place. Marcus exhaled, fingers tightening around his phone. He had a choice. Stay and fight, risking everything, or walk away and seek peace. Which option would prove harder? The next morning found him sitting across from his attorney, Daniel Harper, as they discussed his legal options. They're going to push you out, Daniel said gravely. The threats, the smear campaign, the pressure from within, it's all part of their strategy. They want you to be the one to give in. Marcus rubbed his hand over his face, feeling the weight of it all. And if I don't, they'll make your life miserable. Daniel replied with a sigh. They might not fire you outright, but they'll find other ways. Bad flight assignments, administrative investigations, performance concerns. They'll create a paper trail that looks justified. Marcus nodded slowly, realizing the bitter truth. He had seen it happen to others. Now it was his turn. And if I take legal action? Daniel hesitated before responding. It would be a long battle. Costly. Public. You'd win, eventually, but at what cost? Marcus glanced down at his hand. He never wanted any of this. He had only wanted to do his job. Fly planes. Now he found himself ensnared in something far more complex, and perhaps he had already fulfilled what he set out to do. That afternoon, Marcus found himself in a coffee shop, browsing through his emails when a new notification caught his eye. Subject line: an exciting opportunity. Marcus frowned as he clicked it open. Dear Captain Williams, we have been closely following your journey and admire your bravery. At SkyWest Airlines, we pride ourselves on hiring the finest pilots, those equipped with skill, experience, and integrity. If you're open to a new beginning, we would be eager to chat. Warm regards, Jennifer Blake, Director of Pilot Recruitment, SkyWest Airlines. Marcus gazed at the email. A new beginning. A company genuinely interested in him. It felt like a breath of fresh air after months of feeling suffocated. But was he truly ready to make the leap? The next day, Marcus arrived at Atlantic Airways headquarters for a final discussion with the corporate executives. Facing him across the table were Richard Calloway, the CEO, along with two HR representatives. While their faces remained neutral, Marcus could sense it, the calculated indifference. They wanted him out. Calloway cleared his throat. Captain Williams, we understand you've been under substantial stress. Given the circumstances, we're prepared to offer you a severance package if you decide to resign. Marcus raised an eyebrow. So, you're suggesting I get paid to leave quietly? The HR representative shifted uncomfortably. We believe this is in the best interest for everyone involved. Marcus leaned in. Let me ask you, Mr. Calloway, do you sincerely think anything will change here? Or is this just about public relations? The CEO hesitated for a moment, but that brief pause told Marcus everything he needed to know. He exhaled slowly. That was his answer. He pushed his chair back and stood upright. I'll have my resignation on your desk by the end of the day. Calloway nodded. We appreciate your professionalism. Marcus chuckled softly. Professionalism, that's what they termed it when they finally got their way. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. Without glancing back, he stated, You didn't break me, and then he walked out. A week later, Marcus stood on the tarmac of SkyWest Airlines, watching the sunrise illuminate the sky with vibrant hues of orange and pink. His new uniform felt unfamiliar at first. Different airline, different logo, yet the burden on his shoulders felt significantly lighter. He climbed into the cockpit of his new aircraft, letting his hands glide over the controls. This was where he truly belonged. He wasn't naive. The industry still had significant challenges ahead. Racism, bias, and corporate cover-ups wouldn't vanish overnight. He had initiated a conversation that many would rather avoid, yet in doing so, he had created a significant impact. And now, at last, he was free. As he soared upwards, slicing through the clouds, Marcus experienced a sensation that had eluded him for far too long. Serenity.